Welcome to the month of Valefor here on A Year of Final Fantasy, and the month of Chocobos, unofficially. This month we're going to delve into the massive realm that is the Chocobo. This video here will take a look at what a Chocobo is, why it's one of the mascots of the franchise, and just look how cute and adorable they are. So hopefully you're at least somewhat familiar with Chocobos, but if not, let's go ahead and do a bit of a rundown on what this creature exactly is. And if you want to get down to brass tacks about Chocobos, basically the least you need to know is that Chocobos are the analog, I guess, of a horse in Final Fantasy. In fact, as far as I can think, actually, horses don't exist in the franchise at all. I could be wrong on that though. Regardless, Chocobos themselves are generally known to be essentially huge, yellow, usually, birds with three-toed claws that have an insatiable hunger for different kinds of grains and nuts, the most common of which being Geisel grains. And Chocobos themselves are used for pretty much a multitude of things, but they're usually portrayed as some kind of domesticated bird for travel purposes. However, Yoshitaka Amano originally envisioned Chocobos as something completely different than what we have today. And in fact, some of his designs are downright disturbing, and one of his original designs pretty much kind of made it into the Final Fantasy V OVA that I talked about. Chocobos, like many staples of the franchise, began their appearance in Final Fantasy II, and have been a bedrock part of the franchise ever since. I do need to mention though that whenever Final Fantasy I got remastered and came out, even though there are no Chocobos in that game, there are statues that look like them. So one rather interesting thing about Chocobos are their auditory cries, and when referencing Chocobos, this is a huge point of contention on the internet. In fact, let me warn you, if you go down this rabbit hole, you may never come out. So I'll just distill it all down for you, give you a couple of rundowns on what's going on here with these noises that they make, and you can make your own decision about it. So the big contention here comes from the fact that the series Chocobos have been known to say a few conflicting things. They say wark and or they say que. There's not a hard, fast rule here, and there are a ton of different fan theories out there of, why they're used and when they're used or whatever, and it's just a bit of a clusterfuck of information. So I'll tell you what I found on my own, maybe give you my interpretation, and then you can just make the call yourself. So it seems that in general, wark is used in the earlier games of the franchise, going from around Final Fantasy VII and back. Then from around 8 and on, they switch over to the word que or quay, I've heard it called. Most common interpretations is that que is the actual cry and was changed to wark due to the terrible translation issues, especially looking back on Final Fantasy V and VII. The strange thing here though is that usually when someone mistranslates something, it still kind of resembles the word of their origin. For example, in Final Fantasy VII in Japan, the flower girl is named Erisu and was translated to Eris, which makes sense. And since then, the developers have gone back and formally changed it to Aerith, which I've said this many times, I absolutely hate, but still, it resembles the name. Here with wark and que, with the exception of both of them using the letter W, that's pretty much all that they have in common. If it's a translation issue, it is a big one where someone said it and just made the word wark. So moving on, there have been some commercials relating Chocobos to ostriches, I guess, in Japan, and you can go and check out that video. It's our first commercial video, but the weird thing here though is that the bird sounds like it's saying wark, or at least it sounds closer to wark than que. So that could be the origin of it as well, but it's strange because none of those commercials have ever aired in the States. So you could make an argument that maybe Square sent over those promotional materials to the translator, but that just, I don't know, the timelines don't match up. Another theory that I've heard that's gained some ground with fans is that wild Chocobos or feral Chocobos, whatever you want to call them, say wark, while the domestic Chocobos say que, which doesn't really hold water once you start looking at Final Fantasy V, where Bart's lifelong friend and traveling companion Boko says wark, which clearly he's domesticated. If he wasn't, then he wouldn't be traveling around with an owner. Others have put forth that they have both of these cries and they're used in different situations, maybe like a cat hisses and meows and purrs, different actions depending on different circumstances. But again, I don't recall a game where they used both interchangeably. So what's my conclusion here? Honestly, I have absolutely no idea. I don't have any kind of other hidden lore that's revealed to me about the truth. So I just say que, but if you want to use wark, then go on by all means. It's clear though that we all need to come to a conclusion so we can live in harmony, because the fictionalized language of a mutant bird creature is super important for day-to-day conversation. Anyway, let's move on from that. I've just given my spiel, and that's the last I'm going to touch of it. And I want to move on to coloring right now. So it's been pretty clear from the early days that yellow is basically the run-of-the-mill chocobo color, but they do in fact come in a very wide variety of colors, and each one of those colors is usually associated with different abilities and powers. Now, that's not exactly true in all the games, but, generally it is. And I guess the one that I'm going to focus on right now is Final Fantasy VII, because honestly, that's the one I'm most familiar with Chocobo colors. Final Fantasy VII introduced a kind of like a mini-game side quest with chocobo breeding, where you can feed them different foods of greens and nuts and all of that to breed them. And then from there, if your chocobo meets the requirements, you're going to breed them. You're going to breed out a colored chocobo. Obviously, yellow ones are the most common, but there are some other ones. Specifically, there are blue and green ones. Green chocobos are mountainous chocobos, which can cross mountains with ease, and blue chocobos are river chocobos that can cross shallow water quickly. Beyond that, black chocobos exist, and specifically in Final Fantasy VII, they're basically a combination of green and blue chocobos, and they have the ability to fly. But beyond that, there are some specifics about where they can land in the world. White chocobos exist, usually having some kind of healing or support capabilities. Red and pinkish chocobos exist as well, but aren't necessarily fleshed out like the other ones are. And in some of the games, like Tactics maybe, usually the red one is a bit more physically powerful, but otherwise they don't have any kind of special abilities or special monikers. So other than Final Fantasy VII, even more so, some of the colors have appeared in various games, such as brown, purple, silver, and all of them have different offensive and defensive capabilities, but otherwise they just aren't seen with the frequency of the others. And I guess the best place to put this is here. I don't know where else to put it in the video, but newly hatched chocobos are called chocobos. So there you go. You can't unknow that now. Anyway, chocobos are featured prominently, especially in the latter games, with chocobo racing and breeding and all of that. Specifically racing-wise, it's basically the analog of horse racing. A lot of games that have this, you can bet on it, especially, again, like Final Fantasy VII. These racing minigames are usually used to train up the chocobos for the breeding purposes, but they're used in a bunch of different ways. Furthermore, there's a sort of chocobo lore, I guess, that allows them a higher station than just quote-unquote travel bird. In many of the games, the chocobo, I guess leader, for lack of a better word, is known as the Fat Chocobo, which is an incredibly large, obese chocobo that can speak to humans in some of the games with their own language, with the human language. I'm not sure how they can do this, or how the Fat Chocobo is chosen, or I don't know. The more you question it, the more it just completely doesn't make sense. So aside from their regular role of travel, since the beginning of summoning, chocobos have appeared, a fair amount of times as a summon itself, usually summoning maybe the Fat Chocobo or a regular chocobo that appears with a Moogle, but chocobo summons do appear in quite a few of the games. So along with the notoriety of the Fat Chocobo, there's a sort of famous chocobo that appears quite often in the series, if not completely physically, then it's alluded to. And this chocobo debuted in Final Fantasy V as the main character's companion, Boko. Usually in a game, if there's a call for an iconic chocobo for whatever reason, Boko is the name of the game. So I guess I'll finish off the video with some of the biggest chocobo admirers of the franchise. Obviously, Bartz is the first character of the franchise to have a real connection with one. The Crusaders in Final Fantasy X used chocobos during their crusade against Sin, and also in Final Fantasy Tactics, they're used as mounts as well. Final Fantasy XIII has a few great admirers, or, at least people connected with chocobos. The obvious one being is that Zaz keeps a chocobo in his hair, and I don't really want to go any further than that due to storyline reasons. And alright, okay, so I have to stop for a second, and I'll bring this back up whenever we get to Final Fantasy XIII, but I've always wondered why his hair, his afro, isn't just completely crusted over with chocobo shit. I'm honestly not even trying to be funny. The logic of it just so confusing. I guess that's why I really enjoyed Radagast from The Hobbit, because they actually thought of everything with the birds living under his hat, and he has all caked onto his hair. I don't know. I don't know why I brought that up. But, I mean, I guess if you bring it to its logical conclusion about the world itself, we really never see the main characters defecate. And you know what? I gotta just cut off this topic right now. It's gone to a weird place. Alright, I'm gonna move on. Going on from Final Fantasy XIII, I guess I'll just mention that Final Fantasy XV has Prompto, and Prompto loves chocobos, like, a lot. Probably more than anyone in the franchise should. And, well, You know what? I'm not going to say that because we do have one more character to talk about. And who is that character? Well, this person has transcended Choco's space-time with her fascination of chocobos. She makes Prompto's love for chocobos look like he wanted to commit mass genocide on the species. She's that into them. And who am I talking about? Motherfucking Chocolina. There's some story elements to Chocolina that slightly skew my introduction of her, and I'll leave it at that. But Chocolina, as I said, has transcended space-time quite literally to spread the good word of chocobos. And her love, you know what? It's not even love. You had to invent a new word for that affection to chocobos. To say that she loves them would be an understatement of literally the entire history of the cosmos. Also, I'm not sure if they're supposed to be the same person, but a similar, again, if not the same person, appears in World of Final Fantasy, but her name is Chocolate, probably due to the fact that the game has some heavy coffee shop scenes, which is weird, but I'm sure that has something to do with the latte part, and obviously it also sounds like chocolate. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. So chocobos, and this, I can't not mention this, chocobos have their own theme song, and that theme song has been remixed into every single genre that you could possibly imagine. Super catchy, and it's surprising how many different types of music it fits into. So yeah, I couldn't leave the chocobo video without talking about that. Alright, if you didn't know about chocobos before, hopefully you've gotten a pretty damn solid foundation to discover the magic of chocobos. So this month is going to be dedicated to the Chocobo spin-off series of games, and there are a ton of them, much like the Crystal Chronicles series. But in fact, even more so, I may have to double up on them throughout the month. But surprisingly, most of them are pretty freaking awesome. So welcome to the month of Valefor, kick back, get some Geishel greens, and let's do this.